How's it going, Verona? It's great to get you on the podcast. I'm actually really excited for our conversation today.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for having me. Really, really excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting time of the year for me. I'm normally kind of like burnt out from everything by this point, and so I don't know. The years past, I've scheduled a huge amount of podcasts in September and October just to have content for November, December, January. But like this year I'm actually feeling good. I don't know if I did something different or what, but recordings are going longer this year. But I'm really happy to have you on. I'm really excited to talk about this report that you put out on just cybersecurity globally overall.
Yeah, no, very happy to be here. And as I say, we've think it's a bit of a weird time for me. So I operate in the kind of public policy space of cyber policy, and it's always pretty intense this time of year. A lot of governments and think tanks and that sort of thing have a lot of their conferences in the run up to Christmas. So it's always a bit of an insane run in the 2 months up to Christmas, and then we all collapse in a big heap on the 25th of December.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a couple that I wanted to go to. They were like related to like space and cybersecurity. And it was like so last minute. It was like one's in November, like right around the holidays. The other one's in December. It's just like, do I want to go to it? Yes. But I also have like little kids and I don't want to like bring them along. It's just a complete mess, with doing it like last minute like that.
I feel like the geography of kind of being near London makes it a little bit easier. So I've just got back from Brussels, and
Yeah.
so the kind of geography of Europe makes it a little bit easier to kind of get around to those sort of things last minute. But yeah, can imagine. Don't have
Yeah.
kids, so yeah, the I have the more flexibility and I guess more sleep to give me the energy to go to those sort of things.
Yeah, it was interesting to me. So I went to Europe for the very first time, I mean, it was over 10 years ago at this point. It was like 12 years ago. I did, a short study abroad session in Germany just in time for Beer Fest. That was amazing. And I was talking to someone from Russia, and he was saying like, oh, like how much of the United States have you been to and everything. And I was telling him, I was like, man, I've been to like maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 states. And like that was a good amount. That's probably like the average amount for someone my age at that time. I mean, it's probably the average amount for someone of any age in America. And he was completely shocked. He was like, "Oh my god, you haven't even seen like 50% of your country." I was like, "You have any clue how big the country is? Like, I can drive for 8 hours in my state and not be out of my state." Like, that's how big my state is. Like that's insane. And he goes, "Oh, I didn't even realize, because if you drive for 8 hours anywhere in Europe, like you're going over 2, 3, 4 countries, like with ease, like with traffic and everything, like with no traffic, I'm still in Illinois. It's crazy."
Yeah, no, absolutely. I often get accused as I'm someone that grew up in London, and so maybe have sometimes a bit of a London centric view even of the UK. So I mean, I really have no excuse, but there's a lot of the UK I haven't even seen.
I really want to go to London. Me and my wife, we keep on talking about it, and we definitely want to go. And when we go, I think we want to go for like 2 weeks at least. Because, like, when I go to I have a rule where when I go to another country, like, if I don't know exactly when I'm going back, like, basically the second trip has to already be booked. So
Hmm.
if that doesn't happen, then like I do absolutely everything. I mean, I come back from these vacations and I'm just like, completely beat up. And it's because like every minute of the day I have something planned. Like I'm eating at this restaurant that I want to go to. I'm doing this event. I'm going and seeing this museum or whatever it is, I do vacations a little bit differently. I had a friend with me on my last trip to Germany, and I built in like one day of like doing nothing. And we just like, I mean, it was like from the time we got off the plane, there was like, so of course there's construction on the S-Bahn, and now we have to like get off and find a bus and get to our hotel and everything. And then literally from the time we get off the plane, we're doing something the entire time. And then we get to that one day and he's like, "What are we doing?" I was like, "I don't know, sleeping." Like we were literally out until 3 a.m. last night. Like I'm chilling, man.
Yeah, my husband, I think has gotten so used to me having like a really detailed spreadsheet of what we're doing hour by hour on our holidays, and often feels like a lot of the stuff that we end up doing is quite spontaneous, but absolutely not. It's been kind of planned for several weeks in advance because, to your point, I want to make the most of going there because I never know when I'm going to go back. So
Right. But why don't we circle back, to how you kind of got into the space, right? Because you're kind of in like a parallel space to cybersecurity, but you're close enough to know quite a bit about the space. Tell me about your journey.
yeah, sure. So I I kind of my background is very much in kind of public policy, government relations, that sort of thing. So I've been doing that for many years now and spent quite a lot of time working across different organizations, across different sectors, understanding the policy issues, helping organizations navigate that. So literally everything from energy to transport to kind of broader tech. And working for little companies and big companies, both in-house and as a consultant. Then eventually ended up at NCC Groups, the kind of UK headquartered global cybersecurity firm, and they kind of had a specific role within their government affairs. So I joined maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I honestly feel like I have found my absolute cultural home when it comes to operating within cybersecurity. So I think where I'd been kind of going through kind of different roles and gaining experience across different sorts of organizations and different policy issues, you kind of eventually get quite bored quite quickly because kind of once you know a sector, it's you understand the issues, and that kind of continuous learning stops after about a year. But so far it hasn't stopped at all at kind of within cybersecurity, and I really love it. And I will never leave the sector, I'm sure, because it's such an awesome space to be working in terms of the decisions that governments are making and how much it's impacting how we can all operate in cyberspace, but also some of the standards and stuff that we have to kind of comply with across the board as organizations, and how quickly kind of the space is moving, and also just all of the really awesome, very clever people that I get to work with on a day-to-day basis, and the stuff that they're doing being kind of genuinely beneficial and for the greater good of a more secure cyberspace. So yeah, it kind of ticks all the boxes in terms of purpose and a space that's evolving so rapidly, never getting bored, continuously learning, and really feeling like within my kind of current role, having the opportunity to make that link between policymakers and politicians and government and the world of cybersecurity, and often acting as a bit of a translator, I guess, between those two worlds, because they speak very different languages a lot of the time, but bringing the kind of insights and learnings from the awesome work that my colleagues do into some of the kind of decision making processes that governments and policymakers are looking at when they're looking to kind of legislate or regulate or implement kind of broader government policies, is something that I really enjoy every day, and get a lot of purpose and a sense of fulfillment from it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating that you have that experience, right? Because I have the same experience from like a technical perspective, right? Where it's like never ending learning. There's always something that you can specialize in. There's always something, that's going on that you didn't know that you have to learn and whatnot, which is very exciting for me. And like I think that that's probably where like I joined and left so many other companies being on like their internal security team, because for me it's like as soon as I learn the environment and the tech behind it, it becomes uninteresting very quickly for me. And so now I'm on the other side where I'm doing consulting, and I'm seeing new customers every single day, multiple times throughout the day, learning new environments, learning new tech, all this different stuff. And so it's like reignited that fire in me to like keep going. And I always tell everyone that is considering getting into cybersecurity really in any capacity, is that you have to be ready to constantly be learning and feeling like you don't know enough. Like there's a
Mhm.
certain level of imposter syndrome. Like I've had on people that, allegedly, I have to say allegedly because he'll be so mad at me. He'll text me if I don't. that have allegedly, hacked airplanes midair while they're on the plane. Right. And he even tells me the exact same thing, where like you have to be always learning. And there's situations where he goes into it and he doesn't know everything, and this is one of the most well-known hackers, in the entire world, where like this guy loses a job and within 24 hours, like he has 7 offers in front of him, of him literally just saying, I lost my job. And, within 24 hours, companies are just throwing offers at him, not even him like applying or anything like that, not even him asking for a job. That's what happens. Right. And so it's a space where something that I love about it too is that like you can learn these skills, you can take this knowledge and you can turn it into something so much more, right? Like I turned it into this podcast. I turned it into consulting on the side, right? Like I turned it into so many different things. And I feel like there's not that many fields where you can clock in for your 9 to 5 and your 9 to 5 work directly relates to your side hustles, and your 9 to 5 makes you better at your side hustles, and your side hustles make you better at your 9 to 5. Like I don't know, I haven't seen any other industries or anything that kind of compare to that.
Yeah, no, so true. And I think it points at a challenge that I have in my day job, which is that governments move pretty slowly, and like legislatures, and and when they're looking to legislate or regulate, it's kind of a painfully so slow process. And I think often kind of working with lots of my awesome colleagues, they get frustrated at kind of how slow things move and how long things take at a kind of government decision making level, because we are operating in this space and we're also used to it operating in a space that is evolving so quickly, and that we're having to move quickly to keep up with it. I mean, there's a kind of long-standing campaign that we're running in the UK, for example, to update the Computer Misuse Act, which is kind of our equivalent of the CFAA, and to provide better legal protections for security researchers. And made brilliant progress, but it's taking years to do that because it takes such a long time to get government and kind of policymakers up to speed with the issue and looking to kind of prioritize it when they're looking to balance kind of other things that are often in the news. And that piece of legislation now is 35 years old. It's the main piece of legislation which governs cybercrime in the UK, and the fact that it hasn't necessarily been updated very much at all in those 35 years is just complete madness when we think kind of how far we've come in those 3.5 decades. So yeah, it's the kind of the challenge of keeping up, and all of the effort that we all make to kind of keep up is something that I see really, really vividly in my day job when I am engaging with governments and trying to get them to move quickly, obviously moving with safeguards and moving with a level of looking to kind of legislate and regulate for the long term and with flexibility and all of that stuff. Yeah, getting them to move quickly can sometimes be a frustrating process.
Yeah, that is a really good point, and I feel like people don't really understand that much because they don't work, with the government in their day-to-day job, and most people don't. When I was just getting started in IT, I've led the federal and the military contracts for a small company here in Chicago, and the government they taught me this slogan very well, is to hurry up and wait, right?
Mm,
And it's funny because like, yeah, you'll wait for years, and then when they finally want to do something, it's, "Well, we need it yesterday."
yeah.
Like we need
Mm.
it done immediately, like right now. It's just a crazy way of doing it. And for you to mention, that piece of legislation has been talked about for 35 years. That is absurd to me because like how quickly cybersecurity evolves, even within a year, and like that's the problem that I have, is that the legislation does not evolve as quick. And so we put these rules in place that kind of almost don't mean anything for the most part, in my opinion. And then, when companies get breached, I mean, what are we finding Meta? We're finding Meta like what, $20 billion? I mean, there's some mathematician at Meta that does the calculation of, oh, okay, we'll make that back in 2 days. Yeah, we could pay the 20 billion. Like it doesn't matter, right? It's inconsequential. And so like it's a weird place where it's really difficult to hold companies accountable, right? In terms of breaches, but then the governments also need to figure out how to act faster with this sort of thing because there's looming threats over the horizon, and our adversaries are a bit more bold with their attacks than we are, right? Like, I mean,
Um,
if we just think about like the last, major attack that America allegedly led, right? Might have been Stuxnet. Maybe I'm missing one or two. But like at least the one that, sticks out the most is Stuxnet to me. And I mean, that happened, what, 15 years ago at this point? 15 years ago, when we last, like, kind of publicly acted in that manner. And you look at the amount of attacks that Russia's done, right? Just on Ukraine. I mean, it's crazy. And as cybersecurity experts, we look at it and there's some of these attacks that are like, oh, they're probing the network. The way that they're testing that is something that they're preparing for later on down the line. Maybe not even with Ukraine, maybe with another country, but Ukraine is their target and they're testing this out right now. Are
yeah.
you seeing the discussions around that at all in the political circles?
Yeah, definitely. I think principally a lot of this discussion is being driven at the moment out of the US in terms of what does offensive cyber look like in this kind of current environment, and to what extent do democratic governments need to work more closely with the private sector on ensuring that we do have the right offensive cyber capabilities in place, and where does the kind of line get drawn between what should remain the prerogative of the state and where should industry play a role, and kind of what does that look like within an ethical framework. So it's definitely something that we're seeing ramping up and then kind of trickling down across the kind of other jurisdictions around the world. And even in here in the UK, we've had our security minister really ramping up the rhetoric around, offensive cyber capabilities, and the government investing 1 billion in a kind of cyber command within their kind of military capabilities, and looking more at cyber within the kind of context of deterrence as well, and thinking about how do we ramp up investment in deterrence. So I think we're still relatively early days in that ramping up of the rhetoric and announcing kind of big spending announcements. There was another billion in President Trump's Big Beautiful Bill Act, which talks about investment in offensive cyber operations as well. And I think we just kind of need to see how that kind of plays out in practice. But at the moment, the rhetoric does seem to be ramping up in terms of, governments moving to a war footing, this kind of level of distrust on the geopolitical landscape, and needing to develop their own kind of core cyber capabilities. And so, yeah, that's going to be a really, really interesting thing to kind of observe over the next 12 months or so, how that plays out. And also how it impacts us all, right? Because, what would that mean if we do see a real kind of ramping up of activity beyond the kind of sanctions that we've seen in the last couple of years, but ramping up of activity in terms of things like law enforcement takedowns, and working with the private sector to develop offensive cyber capabilities. If we are seeing an uptick of sort of Western liberal democracies doing that, what does that mean for the overall threat landscape? What does it mean for the private sector if they are asked to be playing a more active role within those? And how do we make sure that we do set the right kind of safeguards and legal and ethical frameworks around that? So yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated to see how this one does play out over the next 12 months or so.
Yeah, it's like playing 4D chess almost, right? Like there's so much that goes into it, even just from like from a capabilities perspective. You look at the capabilities that America probably has and that Russia and China probably have. I mean, it's the equivalent of digital nukes. If you could shut down the water supply of a country, that's potentially just as devastating as a nuke going off, right? I mean, it really is that significant. Or shutting down the power grid. Like those are massive things that could happen that would not just like disrupt people's lives. It would change people's lives forever. It might kill more people than nukes. It may take longer, but it may actually kill more. And, I was talking to a cyber warfare officer for, for the NSA, and this was a couple years ago. The episode actually never even went live because I was told uh, very firmly not to let it go live, and so I was very keen on not having the FBI come knocking on my door. It's not a very good look in my neighborhood. And he I asked him, was there ever like a target package that you were given that you couldn't find a way to complete the mission, right? Whether it's like tracking them or monitoring them or developing a package, a exploit package, whatever it might be. And he said no. There's never been a single one. I've done over 200 of these. Like, there's never been a single one that I couldn't figure out how to hack in some way. It doesn't matter what the country was. Doesn't matter if they were in China behind the China's Great Firewall, right? He said the biggest problem for his side is actually getting someone to like pull the metaphorical trigger by the time the exploit is actually found, discovered, weaponized, to have someone actually hit enter on their keyboard and
Mhm.
launch it before it is patched or whatever it is. Because he told me, he's like, sometimes like I'll go into the vault and find an iPhone 0 day that isn't out yet, no one knows about it, and I'll build it into this exploit, and it's like, okay, well, it's on a timetable. Like, if this gets taken out, 90% of my attack doesn't even work, right? And he said most of the time, these 0 days are being found out in time and being patched and whatnot. And it's an interesting delay because in the article that I was skimming through it. Admittedly, I was skimming through it. I'm sorry, I did not read the entire thing,
There's
but
still
it's
time.
yeah, right. But, it was talking about how the policy is shifting towards taking a more offensive
Mm.
approach in cyberspace, cyber warfare, whatever it is, right? Maybe cyber warfare is too strong of a term for the report, right? But when I hear that, it makes me nervous as someone that, so I'm not a hacker, but I'm like as close to being a hacker without being a hacker as you possibly can be, where like I know how to do basically all of it. I just don't do it. And so like I can't call myself a hacker, right? But just seeing the capabilities and then knowing the people in the space that actually do it and the capabilities that they have, it's like we're going on the offensive, okay, but we're not even ready on the defense side to like defend a counter offensive. Like we're
Yeah.
not even close. So it makes me nervous.
No, it's a really interesting point, and I mean, maybe there is some light in that. So the kind of the recent announcement around NATO spending kind of ramping up to 5% and 1.5% of that being in kind of non-traditional defense spending. And I think that governments are looking at how they spend some of that money from a cyber resilience perspective. And there has been some decent progress, a lot of it actually driven by regulations around critical infrastructure resilience and resilience of financial institutions and that sort of thing. But I think we still got, as you said, kind of point to, still got massive gaps that need sorting. And kind of one of the areas that we're constantly seeing is, and there's a bit of a perennial question mark about how we tackle it, is when we're looking at small to medium sized businesses and enterprises. They how do we kind of uplift the resilience of those organizations when they don't have the same resources, they don't have the same skills or access to skills as larger organizations. But ultimately, those sorts of organizations make up a significant percentage of the global economy and the economy of kind of domestic economy of the US, UK, Europe, Australia, and also often form part of the supply chain into these kind of critical infrastructure organizations. So there is a bit of a question mark about how we tackle that at the moment and how we ensure that yes, we need to kind of continue with the efforts of recent years to kind of uplift critical infrastructure resilience, and regulators and national authorities doing, good job of working with those sorts of organizations to address some of that. But what's the kind of broader plan for the supply chain and those smaller organizations, or those organizations that might just kind of fit outside of critical infrastructure and so therefore not necessarily subject to the same standards and regulations? So yeah, big question mark about how governments tackle that. And some of it will require government to put some kind of money behind it in terms of providing some more proactive support. Other parts of it is probably around making sure that the technology that all of those sorts of businesses are relying on is secure by design and secure by default where possible. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a head scratcher at the moment for a lot of policymakers. Hopefully I wasn't too harsh earlier when I was saying how slow governments move, but actually do have some level of sympathy for them, because a lot of these challenges and stuff that they're dealing with, there aren't easy silver bullet solutions, and also there's question marks about the extent to which how much government needs to be responsible versus businesses, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, there's like 100 questions that still need to be answered with it, right? Something that I have found to be pretty interesting is there's a few states in America that are spinning up, like, the Texas Cyber Command, right? There's a couple other states that are doing it too, where they're basically just, enlisting cybersecurity experts into the reserves and then putting them on Cyber Command to help in the event that a massive cyber attack actually happens, which I actually think is a really good idea. That's probably the only way that you can do it at this point, because you have to think about it, right? What's the age range for someone entering the National Guard or military just overall, right? You're young, early 20s, right? Like when I was in my early 20s, I was trying to enlist as well, right? You're not going to get people that are in their 40s enlisting, or 30s, because you have families by then. But by that time, if you're not in, your life is completely different from how it would be if you were in. And there's a lot of things that you would have to give up, to be able to make that work, right? Like it just doesn't work any other way. And so something like the Texas Cyber Command, or Illinois, if they ever get one, or whatever it might be, would be the best way to kind of get that talent that never enlisted, that went the professional route, that are experts in cybersecurity. You enlist them, put them through a short boot camp, give me a nice sign-on bonus, right? Let me, call off from work. I'll be happy to do it. Like that would be awesome. But I feel like that's almost like the only way to kind of manage it in America, at least, because America is so broad, it's so big. The government is literally not big enough to cover, the entire country in terms of cyber infrastructure and cybersecurity. It's just not, because it can barely cover, like the main utilities of the power grid and the water and everything else, right? So there's a lot to it. And I wonder, is there anything like that spinning up in Europe right now, where countries are getting their own kind of version of a cyber command or something like that? I apologize. I just, everyone over here in America are very America focused, not thinking of anything in Europe, like, oh yeah, it's our cousins over there,
No, I mean, yeah, I obviously, keep a very close eye on what's going on over the Atlantic, but I would say my bias too is probably skewed European, so you are forgiven. So there are some efforts. So there's slightly different, but the European Union is saying something called the Cyber Reserve, and what that essentially is a pool of trusted, accredited incident response providers that, in a kind of Ukraine level type situation, they can immediately call upon those providers in order to provide the kind of instant response capacity that you need in that level of crisis. And I think part of that comes back to some of the lessons learned with the war in Ukraine, where there was a need to access that sort of capability quite quickly, but kind of procurement processes were slow and they kind of didn't get stood up as quickly as it necessarily could have. So you see efforts like that. There in the UK, there are discussions, and I'm not sure we've seen it kind of come to full fruition yet, but there are definitely discussions about how you bring in to kind of similar kind of army reservist type model, where you bring in those sorts of individuals into the armed forces to support from a kind of cybersecurity point of view. And not least because I think the other aspect of it, right, is that the public sector can only pay so much, and the salaries that people can get in equivalent roles outside of the armed forces or outside of the public sector or outside of government are kind of considerably higher. And so it's obviously quite attractive for those individuals to, kind of move ship. And so we are seeing things like the kind of reservist model, but we're also seeing a lot of kind of secondment type schemes setting up. So the UK National Cybersecurity Centre runs a thing that we've participated in, I think, since its inception several years ago. I'm called Industry 100, which is a kind of public private sector secondment scheme, and brings in individuals from the private sector to do kind of secondment type things across the kind of entire range of what the National Cybersecurity Centre do. And it can kind of split between kind of really sort of intense secondments around specific projects to actually kind of play more of an advisory role. And they've set up a really, really interesting and very flexible model that I know that other countries around the world are trying to learn from and look if they can set something similar up. But yeah, I think it's always going to be a challenge in our space, especially when we continuously have a skills shortage, that we need to find creative ways of sharing those brains and that talent across the kind of different needs of the nation, whether that's on the private sector or the public sector side.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. And like I have direct experience with what you were mentioning with the pay disparity between going public and private. And, when I was in my 20s, I was trying to go into the agencies, the military, and for one reason or another, they just wouldn't select me, right? And the agencies basically all came back and said, oh, I have to wait until I'm 30, more life experience or something like that, right? And my response was, okay, guys, you do understand that, like, if I'm like mediocre in IT, by the time I'm 30, I'm going to be making double what you would bring me in at. Like, you understand that, right? And they were like, yeah, you still have to wait till you're 30. And, for me, it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense because when I'm 30, I have a whole different set of priorities. Like, I may have a family, I may be married, I may not even live in this part of the country. I may live in another country. And if I'm making double, why would I ever give that up to then go and be nothing in some agency, be the lowest person on the totem pole, have to wait 10 years to be able to have like the same amount of tenure basically as I would in where I just left, like it really doesn't make sense. So that's why I see like the reservist part of it as being like the only realistic option, right? And with, like you said, the skills shortage, the talent shortage in cybersecurity, we hear about it constantly, right? Like it's like 5 million, unfilled roles or whatever it is, right? I probably overstated it quite a bit there, but you get the point, right? There's millions of unfilled roles, globally, and they're not going to be filled because there's literally not enough professionals. And the market is weird right now. The job market is very weird in America right now because, I'll give you an example. So I've been in cybersecurity for like 10 or 12 years at this point. Basically, every year up until maybe 2023 or 2024, like my inbox would just be flooded with people trying to interview me and hire me just nonstop. It's a nonstop thing. People just straight up willing to offer you more money just to get you in the door and everything else like that. And now there's like nothing. And so I'm not trying to say that like I'm the most experienced person in the world or the most skilled or anything like that, but that's a very normal occurrence for people in this field where they were getting offers daily, literally daily. And now we're all getting nothing. And you look at the jobs and there's over 100 applying to these jobs within 8 hours. It's like, okay, well, how does anyone actually stick out in these piles of resumes to get into these jobs? Like it's a weird situation right now. Did you touch on any of that in the report by chance?
No, we don't. But I think the report kind of touches more on the kind of broader capabilities rather than the kind of individual job market. So it's more around kind of how nation states are developing their capabilities. And something I didn't touch on the report, but I'm just thinking as you were talking there that is interesting at the moment is the extent to which the kind of nations and kind of like-minded countries and allied nations are trying or can even work together to kind of develop some of these capabilities and the kind of cross pollination of talent as well. So making sure that we do have that level of cooperation and collaboration on a global scale, particularly when a lot of us are facing very similar threat environments, very similar kind of changes. So but again, I think that's something really tricky to achieve from a global talent perspective. And I think there have been some efforts, though I don't know how successful they've been, to try and create kind of talent frameworks, skills frameworks that go across different countries. So the UK and Singapore, for example, had kind of agreed to develop professional standards that can be applied both in the UK and Singapore. So if you're buying somebody with a level of kind of accreditation in the UK, that is kind of applicable in Singapore and vice versa, just to try and enable some of that global movement of talent where nations do have shortages and they need to kind of bring in talent from abroad. So yeah, I think it's a pretty complicated picture, and I think different countries seem to be going through different phases in their kind of talent pools and kind of where they are seeing shortages. But yeah, that doesn't sound great in the US at the moment. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's weird right now. Thankfully, I'm employed, but I know a lot of people that have been off of work for 10 plus months. And it's like, man, like, what are you talking about? Like, I've worked with you, you have all the right certifications. It just doesn't make any sense. But that's really interesting that they're forming like a global, kind of body of certification or regulation that people can, immediately go into like a international capacity. I always wondered how like the certifications I have would translate to like me moving to Europe. If I move to Europe, am I immediately, you know, not going to get a job, or are people still looking for the certifications that I have, or, how does that work? Like that's definitely been something that's been on my mind for sure, which I guess it's still like that American centric mentality where I kind of just assumed the industry wide certs that I have are kind of like respected everywhere, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure you find they are. I think where a lot of these talent frameworks seem to be coming in is particularly any work that's kind of related to government work or national infrastructure. So there are big efforts at the moment to kind of, as government puts it, professionalize the industry and create levels of kind of harmonized talent frameworks that governments can more easily tap into and require either the people that they're hiring directly or the organizations that they're kind of asking to kind of supply services into their market. They are asking them to meet a certain kind of government-backed accreditations that have been harmonized. So in the UK, it's the kind of UK Cybersecurity Council, and this is kind of a new initiative to have kind of chartered professionals in the same way that you would have chartered professionals in accountancy or in medicine or those sorts of sectors. And so government really does want to create more of a kind of harmonized talents framework that it can go, yes, those people are sufficiently signed up to a level of ethics and accreditation that we as the government are happy with, that they can kind of work for us. I think the flip side of it is, particularly in the UK at the moment, the cybersecurity industry has been recognized as a big potential growth sector, not least because if you want to grow the other parts of the economy, you need good cybersecurity, you need good digital security, and so kind of acting as an underpinning element to that, but also seen as a sector that's going to grow and deliver the economic growth that we're all after at the moment in its own right. And so as part of that, we are seeing a lot of investment from governments in those sort of skills initiatives, skills frameworks, because they not only see it as a way of creating a clearer route for them to purchase trusted services and trusted people, but also see it as a way of making it easier for individuals and graduates to find their way into the industry, because sometimes it can be pretty complex. And as we know, a lot of people had really interesting and really diverse kind of career routes, very non-traditional. A lot of people don't even necessarily hold accreditations and are now doing absolutely awesome things at the top of the industry. But I think the kind of flip side of that from the government's perspective is that it creates a bit of confusion about if you want to kind of enter the industry, kind of what's the routes that you can go. And so there's kind of these two elements to it. But yeah, on the positive side, we are really seeing, at least in the UK, the government ramping up its kind of backing of the industry and trying to invest more in the industry and create opportunities. So feeling relatively optimistic about that at the moment, but we'll see how it plays out over the next few months. So we're going to have a new national cyber strategy shortly, which should set out in more detail how the government's kind of backing its rhetoric with proper policies and investment.
I mean, that's probably really the only way that you can do it, is if you're going to take a more offensive approach towards cybersecurity overall for at the nation state level, then you have to invest in the private sector to get the skills that you need to pull off the operations and to actually provide the defense on the back end of your operations, because I still feel like a country is too big for a government, even in Europe, to go and say, okay, we're going to protect the water supply. Well,
Hmm.
how many companies are in between you and the actual water that gets to my house? Like there's probably
Yeah.
a lot. There's probably a lot of IoT controllers and, all this other stuff, right? And so for any government to say, oh, yeah, we're going to secure it all, it's not very realistic. If you're going to secure it all, that means that you have to, like, really bolster up these companies with talent that can actually do it and really drive it home to them that, like, hey, you have to secure this no matter what.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think we are seeing this kind of, because we are around the world in a period of austerity and public sector and government funding cuts coming, and obviously seeing it in the US, but we are also seeing it across Europe and elsewhere in the world. And what that is kind of forcing governments to do is basically say, these are the things that we're responsible for, and these are the things that we're going to do to invest in and help with the resilience. So things like kind of investment in the ecosystem, the skills, the capabilities, the talent, and focusing on those areas that they might have kind of direct responsibility over, like defence or healthcare. But also at the same time, we are continuing to see the regulations that a lot of organizations are subject to tighten and strengthen. And then so in order to meet that bar, it's you do need the kind of two sides of the coin, because organizations need to kind of meet this resilience bar, both because it's the right thing to do and is necessary, but also because increasingly regulations are dictating to them that they need to do that, and dictating to more organizations as well that they need to do that. I think in Europe at the moment, there's a couple of pieces of legislation that are going through or have gone through. And that will basically mean that literally thousands and thousands more organizations that have never had to apply these rules before now have to apply them. But when you've got that, like you said, you also need the people and the capabilities to help deliver that level of resilience and meet the expectations that governments are expecting. And so, I think it's a good thing that we are seeing some recognition from governments that they do need to play that role from an ecosystem development perspective, and make sure that they're acting as that kind of skills developer, but also the kind of convener as well, and bringing together the respective parts to collaborate and develop the things that those organizations will need to be able to access in order to deliver on their ever strengthening expectations of businesses and organizations.
Unfortunately, we're at the top of our time here, but it's been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. I know it's later in your day, so I really appreciate you taking the time, especially now, to come on and, talk about this and everything. It's fantastic.
No worries, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, before I let you go, how about you tell my audience where they could find you if they wanted to connect with you, and where they could find your report if they wanted to, find it and read it and learn from it.
Yeah, awesome. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Verona Johnstone Hulse is a pretty unique name, so I'm sure you'll find me if you have a search. And equally, yes, so our NCC Group's published our global cyber policy radar, so that explores some of the themes that we've obviously chatted about in terms of the offensive cyber capabilities, but also what's next for kind of cyber regulations, governments looking at things like banning ransomware payments and putting in kind of efforts to try and harmonize some regulations, whilst, as I said, also strengthening the rules that underpin those regulations. So if you're interested in learning more about where cyber regulations, government cyber policy, etc., is going, you can access that on NCC Group's website, or if you have me on LinkedIn, I've probably put 3 posts up about it already. So feel free to kind of go in through that route.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Cool.